Do you know who your son's father is?
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's discussion about a truly jaw-dropping legal battle. This story centers on a paternity case that left a man locked up for 5 years, even though DNA tests eventually showed he was not the father of the child. We'll walk through all the twists and turns in an informal conversational style, so feel free to grab a snack and get comfortable. Let's start at the very beginning. A woman, we'll call her Ms. Sier, claims that a man named Mr. Maner is the father of her son, Dylan. She arrives at the courthouse determined to prove her point. For years, she has insisted that Mr. Maner is the one responsible for Dylan, and that he needs to step up and pay child support. This is not just a small request. If she's telling the truth, it means he's legally on the hook for years of unpaid support. But that's not where the story ends. In fact, it's only the tip of the iceberg. According to Mr. Maner, his interactions with Ms. Sier were never as serious as she claims. He says they lived close to each other, and he knew her because she was friends with a relative of his, aunt, cousin, or some other family member. In his words, they only spent one night together in an intimate way, and it was never meant to be any sort of long-term relationship. Meanwhile, Ms. Sier has always suggested they had more than just a fling. She believes, or at least used to believe, they dated or had some sort of ongoing relationship. However, even if we take her at her word that they had a casual relationship instead of a full-blown romance, both of them acknowledge that they were at least together in a physical sense once. And that one event is enough to raise the possibility that Mr. Maner might be Dylan's father. Many years ago, Ms. Sier went to court to get child support from Mr. Maner. She claimed that he was the father and she needed help raising Dylan. But when the court date arrived, Mr. Maner did not show up. As he tells it, he was broke, staying with his mother and living across the state with no easy way to travel to the courtroom. When a person does not appear at a paternity or child support hearing, a judge can, and often does, issue a default judgment. That means the judge can legally declare that person to be the father, even if no DNA test was performed in the courtroom that day. Because Mr. Maner was absent, the court automatically named him the natural father of Dylan. After that, everything snowballed. He was officially on the hook for child support, and from there, failing to pay it was considered a serious legal offense. According to Ms. Sier, there was actually DNA proof from back in the mid-90s that pinned Mr. Maner as Dylan's father. She even brought forward a lab report, one that supposedly confirmed a match. But then things got suspicious. She happened to work in a lab for quite a while, and the details on the paperwork she showed were incomplete. For starters, the report listed no social security number for the father, no photo ID, no signature, just a blank space where all of his details should have been. This raised a ton of questions. How legitimate could this test be if it didn't include any of the normal identifying info that labs typically require? Was this really an official DNA test involving Mr. Maner, or could it have been someone else's sample labeled as his? That doubt led him to become even more skeptical. From his point of view, it was obvious that he had never personally shown up to give any sort of DNA sample back in the 90s. So he believed the report was fake, or at least tampered with. Ms. Sier insisted it was real. She said that even though she worked at a lab, she had no part in manipulating the results. She claimed she had nothing to do with paternity testing at that job. She said she harvested plasma or used large needles, but was never involved in anything, like verifying DNA for paternity purposes. But the missing information on the lab report made everyone's eyebrows shoot straight up. Later, Dylan himself appears in court, in more recent proceedings, to share how he feels about this entire situation. He says he doesn't really know Mr. Maner. They have barely spent any time together, so there's no real father-son bond. Dylan does mention having a half-brother named Chris, who is apparently also a child of Mr. Maner. Dylan and Chris get along well, and Dylan values that connection. No matter what the test reveals, Dylan says he views Chris like a brother, now and forever. However, Dylan does not like the way his mother is being talked about. From his perspective, hearing people tear into a reputation is upsetting. He, mind you, tells Mr. Maner that it's hard to respect someone who he believes has insulted his mother. We can see how complicated this is. Dylan just wants to figure out the truth so he can move forward with his life. Because the old lab results were so questionable, the court decides to arrange a brand new DNA test. This time, it is done with proper identification, forms, and sign-ins. Both Ms. Sier and Mr. Maner have to submit samples in a way that leaves no room for mistakes or tampering. The results are handled by a professional service that double-checks everything. They are so cautious that they run the tests twice. Everyone waits on pins and needles for the final answer. When they come back, the results reveal that Mr. Maner is not Dylan's father. You can practically see the tension in the courtroom snap. Suddenly, the whole story about paternity and child support is turned upside down. Now here's the twist that makes this case so dramatic. By the time these conclusive DNA results surface, Mr. Maner has already spent 5 years in prison. Why? Because he was found guilty of not paying child support for Dylan, even though he kept insisting he was never proven to be the father in the first place. That default judgment all those years ago set things in motion, and once he fell behind on payments, he ended up behind bars. Imagine losing 5 years of your life for refusing to make child support payments on a child you believed wasn't yours. According to Mr. Maynor, this entire ordeal should have never happened. He blames Ms. Sier for filing the initial paperwork that claimed he was Dylan's father, especially if she knew there was a chance he might not be the father. He also believes that the suspicious lab result from the past is proof of fraud. In his mind, that first test was likely faked or improperly handled, ensuring the court would rule in Ms. Sier's favor. When the new tests proved he's not the father, he felt vindicated, but he was also furious that he had spent so much time behind bars. In his eyes, the system is flawed and something went very wrong. The judge essentially placed a guilty verdict on him without verifying that he was biologically related to Dylan. Right when you think it can't get any more unbelievable, there's another bombshell. Ms. Sier says she has known the identity of Dylan's real father all along. In fact, she is still in contact with that man. The courtroom and everyone watching is shocked. How could she claim Mr. Maynor was the father if she knew there was someone else? It's especially strange because she actually sent Mr. Maynor to jail for 5 years when he couldn't pay child support. Now she's stating she was aware that another man was Dylan's real biological father the entire time. For Mr. Maynor, this revelation is like having salt poured on a wound. Not only has he lost years of his life, he's also been made out to be a deadbeat dad who abandoned his child. To make things even more confusing, Dylan might now have to come to terms with another man being his true father, someone Ms. Sier already has a relationship with, or at least has been in contact with. Let's pause for a moment and consider the human aspect of this situation. Spending 5 years in prison would be devastating for anyone. There's the loss of freedom, missed opportunities, and mental stress. Then there's the emotional weight of being labeled a deadbeat dad or a criminal for not paying child support. On the other side, you've got Ms. Sier, who claims she truly believed, or wanted to believe, that Mr. Maynor was the father. Perhaps she was desperate for support and financial stability, or maybe there's more to the story we don't know. Dylan is caught in the middle of all this. He grew up believing one man was his father, only to learn that the situation wasn't that straightforward. At the same time, he's been trying to protect his mother's reputation in the face of harsh criticism. The news that his mother always knew the real father's identity might be incredibly painful for him. It's possible he feels betrayed or lied to, or maybe he's relieved to have a definite answer about who his father is. When people hear this kind of story, they often wonder if the mother could be charged with paternity fraud. Laws vary depending on where you live, but filing incorrect child support claims or lying about paternity can sometimes lead to legal consequences. Some states might require the mother to reimburse the wrongfully declared father for child support paid over the years, or at least a portion of it. In extreme cases, the mother could face criminal charges for perjury if it's proven she intentionally lied. Mr. Maynor clearly believes Ms. Sier committed fraud. He feels she took advantage of the situation, especially since there was never a proper test linking him to Dylan before that default ruling was made. People who side with him argue that 5 years behind bars is incredibly steep punishment for someone who never should have been labeled the father in the first place. This case highlights how tricky paternity issues can become when one person doesn't appear in court. The legal system tries to resolve cases quickly, but mistakes happen, especially if one party doesn't get a fair chance to present evidence. Once a court order is in place, overturning it can be very difficult, even when new DNA tests come out showing the original ruling was wrong. There's also a lesson here about the importance of DNA evidence. Without it, courts sometimes rely on the word of the mother, along with any other evidence she might present. If the alleged father doesn't show up, the mother's claims can hold a lot of weight. That's what happened here, and it had life-changing consequences for everyone involved. We don't know what the future holds for these individuals. Will Ms. Sier face any legal consequences for naming the wrong father and sending him to prison? Will Mr. Maynor sue for damages or try to have his record cleared? There are so many unanswered questions, but at least one thing is certain. The new DNA tests have shown that he is not Dylan's father, which means the truth is finally out in the open. The biggest takeaway from this entire situation is the significance of being absolutely sure when it comes to naming a child's father. Paternity testing is not just a matter of a piece of paper. It directly affects people's finances, freedom, and family relationships. If you name the wrong person, you're playing with someone's life. And if the court relies on that misinformation, it can lead to years behind bars. This story is a striking example of how complicated paternity disputes can become, especially when one party doesn't participate in the original court process. It also showcases how important it is to have solid proof before assigning legal responsibilities like child support. Ms. Sier seemed set on making Mr. Maynor pay for Dylan, but in the end, it turned out he was not the father at all. The new tests had no gaps, and they clearly showed he wasn't biologically related to Dylan. Meanwhile, Dylan was left in a tough spot, unsure of why things turned out the way they did. He still feels loyalty toward his mother and sees Chris, another son of Mr. Maynor, as a brother figure. Now he has to redefine his understanding of who his father really is, especially since Ms. Sier revealed she's known the real father for quite some time. From the outside looking in, this situation is heartbreaking, confusing, and infuriating all at once. A man spent half a decade in prison for not paying child support for a child he didn't father. The mother apparently had her reasons, but she's facing serious questions about how this happened and why she let it continue for so long. What are your thoughts on this jaw-dropping story? Should Ms. Sier be held accountable, or was this just a tragic misunderstanding?